Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the video that I'm making at the moment. It's about misconceptions about translation. So there are many misconceptions that we hear from people regarding the training and learning of translation. The reason that I'm speaking Arabic is that I believe it would be better to speak in English for those who can benefit from such videos in their future research. Well, you can imagine this to be as a semi-structured interview, although I do encourage people to make interviews among each other in order to enrich their research. Well, anyway, this is something that I wish to do, and I'm going to speak in English. Hopefully, it's going to serve the research community. So that's why I'm speaking in English. Now, before I talk about the misconceptions that people have about translation training, I would like just to lay some scientific foundations. Now, first of all, I'm very well aware of the limitations of my talk and ideas. I'm also aware that every human being tends to be sometimes forgetful. He forgets his role when talking about something. Since I said it's going to benefit the research community, I will try as much as possible to avoid any prejudice. And I'm not going to give an opinion as much as I try to give facts and to explain things as they are indeed, or at least as close to the facts as possible. We understand that perfection is not attainable anyway. However, it's worth the attempt. I'll try my best. If there is an opinion, I will give the opinion and say that this is an opinion, it is not backed by research. How many misconceptions do we have? Probably there are many misconceptions. And the reason that causes me to talk about these misconceptions is when you have a question, when I have a question from one person, it could be a teacher, it could be a translator, it could be an interpreter, it could be a student. On the one hand, I compare all these questions, what I see and what I hear in the marketplace and at the universities as well. So when I see mismatches, things that are not as expected, I believe that this is what we can call misconception. So basically, when I say there is a misconception, I'm not talking about what research has proven. I'm not talking about misconceptions that are fully researched. And this is why I am talking, in fact. It is just to talk about what's happening from observation, hearing, seeing, listening to people, and comparing and contrasting, and personal experience. I'm using my best knowledge and my best experience in the field. And I was one day a teacher at some universities in Jordan. I taught translation courses. And I also worked as a translator, interpreter. I was the training manager of translators at some company here in Jordan. This is a background about me. I also consulted for the training of interpreters and translators for international organizations that I cannot name at the moment. Among other issues that I have made, I wrote 2 reflection books on translation from my experience as well. Hopefully this gives some kind of legitimacy for what I'm going to say as a researcher as well. And as I said, I'm trying as much as possible to be very neutral and try to talk about facts only. So this is my experience and this is my knowledge that I'm talking about. The first misconception is when students used to talk to me. I am from outside universities, of course. I give training courses and sometimes make presentations, lectures, papers at conferences. And in those settings, what happens is that many students came to me and said to me the following phrase: what you teach us in 10 minutes, in one lesson, in one course, is something that we haven't studied over the 4 years of our study at the university level. Some students said to me that what I taught them in one course, even in one lesson sometimes, is much valuable than all that they have learned in their universities. These are verbatim what the students said to me. And this is the first misconception. I call it a misconception because it mismatches what I know is happening to the best of my knowledge and experience at the university level. Universities in Jordan, where I live and teach, have their own programs of translation accredited by the Ministry of Higher Education. To the best of my knowledge, there is a quality assurance program applied on all universities and all departments, and those programs require every teacher to have some foundation for the courses that they teach, including the learning outcomes, the strategies, etc. There is little research. I'm not aware of any research in Jordan talking about the feasibility of such assurance programs, quality assurance programs, concerning translation, concerning interpretation teaching. However, we still cannot say that nothing is being taught at the university for students of translation. We cannot say that the teachers haven't taught anything. From my experience, nobody told me about this, but this is my psychological analysis of what's happening. I cannot really explain why the students think about that in this way. Probably there are other factors that I will discuss with you, but mainly it is because of several reasons. One, illusion. It is my opinion that students have often the illusion that what they get from the university, from the translation department, should be implemented immediately after graduation. And what happened is that since students come to the marketplace and try to work and do not have a job, probably, and I say this is probably, we still need research to understand why, probably many of them will be frustrated and would say, we don't have a job. So they think that the university has not taught them anything. Philosophically speaking, we cannot see any kind of smooth progression between the premise that they don't have a job, they are not qualified, then it means that nobody taught them at the university. This is a kind of fallacy concerning the logic and thought. My recommendation is to have more research, to have some research, not only more, because I don't think that there is much research about that. To have some research about the expectations of students at the university and why are they frustrated outside the university. It happened to me many times that when I taught translation courses and I am from outside the university, many students would come to me and say, we hope that our teachers would have been like you. And my answer to them immediately was, well, in fact, I used to teach at the university. I taught of several translations at several universities, and I couldn't at all get my work appreciated by many students. The majority of students, well, half of the students, you can say, more or less, there is some appreciation. I don't deny that. So I can say there is not much appreciation. Not much appreciation, not in the sense of giving a reward to the teacher, but I had this feeling that people would not really carry out the tasks that I give to them in translation in the way that I wanted this to happen. So maybe I was a bit frustrated. However, there was some appreciation, to tell the truth. They used to like the courses, the teaching that I gave. So I really cannot understand that when I get outside the university, people will say, we hope, we wish that you could have been working in our universities to teach us. I also say to them, if I really go to the university at the moment to teach there will be a main problem. At the end of the day, the university has some paper and pen to be used at the end in what they call examination. There will be grades, and you don't like it. And I know that students do not like to get low grades. This is a distraction, I believe. It's my opinion. It's my opinion that the examination process at universities is a kind of distraction, distracting the student from his goal, from the goal of knowing, getting knowledge, into the goal of getting a mark and a grade. This still needs to be researched. It is a personal reflection. Now, with this being said, we move now to those distractions. What really makes the students think, believe that the university is not teaching them anything? From my experience at the university, I can talk about things that could be possible causes of this problem or this misconception. Because I taught at the university level and I taught students of translation, I tend to find that many of them used to make grammar mistakes. One, many of them used to make mistakes in the words that they choose. The dictionary skills that they use are questionable. In one instance, there was the word shaitan, which means devil in English, and I was surprised that at least 20 students, I remember, out of 59, there were about 59 exactly, and I was surprised at why I had that strange number, 59 students. About 20 of them, I don't remember, I think it was 20, or at least you can say it is between 10 and 20 students translated the word shaitan, which means devil, into the poor servant at the press who doesn't have money. It was just a phrase like this. They had this mistake, for example. Another mistake is that when they come to me, they all the time used to ask about the grades. I'm sorry, not all the time. I mean, it's not extraordinary for me to receive students to ask about the grades than to ask about knowledge, to understand how to improve their knowledge. It happened many times. We still say that people appreciate. Still, there are students who appreciate knowledge, of course. I'm not going to undermine their appreciation, but I'm just trying to be as much objective as possible. Let's try to solve this problem, to find a kind of solution for these misconceptions. Now, in the classroom, I would like to say, I used to teach in several universities. Many of them used to have large classrooms for translation classes. 59, I was saying 63 in some instances. Well, later on it became 30, 20, and sometimes 10, sometimes 8. It depends on the university, because as I said, I taught at several universities. And my question is, when we really have about 60 students in the classroom, or even 20, by the way, I had a challenge. It was very challenging for me to try to give constructive feedback for every student, for every single student. It also dictated on me the way that I would teach my students. Mostly it was theoretical, giving them some theories and trying to give them some exercises to listen to as many of them as possible. You can imagine this classroom. You can imagine also that the large numbers of students dictated on me also the necessity at that time. I thought it was necessary to try to categorize the mistakes, trying to find a kind of profile for their mistakes, so that I thought that I could solve it in one time and that's all. So what happens is that you don't really know. I didn't know whether the intervention that I did at the classroom, in other words, the teaching, was useful or not. I expected that I was doing everything good. At the end of the day, I did not have much of the outcome that I was thinking about. It was many times frustrating to see repeated mistakes by students. So there was an issue, there was a problem. Large numbers could lead to the problem that I didn't have any time to give much time to the students on an individual basis to understand their problems and to see how can I should solve this problem to them. And I'm going just to go further in this problem with the misconception about the university did not teach us anything, as students would say, and I'm going just to explain that, trying to understand the student. What happened for me personally is that I thought of trying to find rules for translation. And mind you, throughout the years, I rarely read any research about teaching translation, by the way. So I was improvising. And I started giving them rules on the word level, how to memorize words, to put them into families, how to learn on the sentence level between English and Arabic. And everybody would be happy to say that we have learned a lot, of course. However, in implementation, in practice, many grammar mistakes happen. That brings me this story that I'm telling you that happened repeatedly in many universities. My case, my scenario, would raise two issues of concern. Now, the first one is that I was clueless concerning the content of the material I should devise, the strategies that I should implement in teaching people translation, and the assessment methods that could really give me an indication whether students have learned or not, in order to see what kind of things that I can replicate and what things that I have to stop doing. It's very important. It's very important because very recently I discovered through experience that teaching students idioms is not going to be fruitful as much as teaching them those idioms in context, in press articles, for example. And in my encounter with many native speakers of English, I was surprised that they told me the idiom you are asking us about is the first time that we hear about it, and we are native speakers of English. This would bring me the alarm bell at saying that, well, why does this happen? Because they are very simple idioms, and they are in the dictionary, in the Collins Global Dictionary and others. There's no explanation for me. Regardless of the fact that this specific native speaker of English does not give me the indication that every person in Britain doesn't know the idiom, well, I know that this raises an alarm for me. It is, am I using the correct, frequent idioms that are used by the British people in the right context? And that was the horrible conclusion that I had at that time. And really, the answer is that I didn't have any clue. I was just trying to teach people idioms based on one criterion. The criterion was that to choose idioms in English that are very close in meaning to those in Arabic. In other words, we have idioms in Arabic that are very similar to those in English, so I teach them the match between the two. That was the only thing that I did. And obviously, this is not based on research. Now, once again, I read about teaching strategies elsewhere in education literature, and I find that psychologically speaking, every person has his own style of learning. We can follow Carl Jung if you like. There are people also who learn by imagination, others by intuition, others by practice, etc., etc. And I was asking myself, and I was shocked throughout the years that I used to teach, how much time I allocated for students of different ways of applying these strategies. How much time I spent on trying to understand what learning strategy is best for a specific student. So these are the questions on my role as a teacher at that time. So I was clueless in terms of even developing the material, especially given the fact that at the university, the process of developing material is not centralized. Now, every teacher has the discretion to use the material that he thinks appropriate, and usually every teacher puts on all his knowledge, expertise, and understanding into the material. And usually we don't know if there are problems or not, but I think it is something that really raises several questions. We don't know. We don't know if it has an effect on the students. But basically at the moment, more and more people graduating from the English departments, from translation departments, really complain. And we hear this complaint everywhere. In the Facebook groups, we hear it on the telephones, I hear it on the Zoom sessions, I hear it everywhere from the students. And worse than this is that when people ask me to nominate a translator for them, I find it very hard to nominate any person. I try and think, and there is no way to find a professional translator for the job. And I heard many of my colleagues complaining the same thing, that they rarely hire a person who is qualified in doing a particular translation task. So maybe there is a problem in the content. We don't know. We still need to have some research on that. Now, back to the question of the students at that time. We finished with the issue of the teacher, maybe, or at least for this time, for the time being. Now let's talk about the misconception also about the students. And I said they have certain misconceptions that universities does not teach them anything. This is what they think. Now there is a problem here. Do students think, this is the problem, do students think that they can translate even if they make grammar mistakes? This is the question. Whether the answer is yes or no, we still need to ask the following question. Why do students at the translation department still make grammar mistakes? In English as well as in Arabic, by the way, which is native to them. How do I know that they make mistakes? Well, as I said, I taught at the university level and gathered some of their assignments in a given year and found that there are lots of grammar mistakes. What are those grammar mistakes? My observation was that the main mistake number one, it is in the verb phrase level. I read lots of translation works of students at the university, and every time I have to see this. There is a problem in the verb, form, and tense. There's always a problem in using the passive voice. There's always a problem that you can see, and I mean by always that I always see this problem. I'm not talking about a student who is insistent on making this problem or mistake. I'm saying that I can see it very frequently. There's always this problem that I can see, that people would not differentiate between the past simple and the present perfect in English, for example. And at least in one instance, a student would say, "Yeah, this is not a big mistake to deduce such a mark from my assignment. It would be 1 mark, for example, out of 20. This is an attitude. This is another issue, and we don't really have research about the attitude of students toward their own mistakes. And please try to think about these topics for your research. What is the attitude of students of translation of their own mistakes when corrected by the teacher? How do they feel? Do they accept it? If they accept it, do they change themselves and try to change themselves? This is a problem. Now, students who say that also that they haven't learned anything at the university, I have one question for them. If they make mistakes on the grammar level or even on the lexical items that they are choosing in their translation, what made them in the first place get into the translation department? And there's the question, isn't there any placement test just to admit or not admit those students? Isn't it a requirement for the department to have only people who speak good English? And I mean by good English, good grammar, in other words. And there's no bad grammar, medium grammar, good grammar. It's either you know the grammar or you don't know it at all. Either you make a mistake or not. So what about the requirements for the entry of those students to the English department or translation department? This is also another topic for research. And we have students, therefore, that are making those mistakes. And what happens is that it brings me now to the other rule that I find people making mistakes in, which is subordination. Subordination is a nightmare, for me at least. It's a nightmare for me to see people just not knowing how to use subordination, run-on sentences, lots of run-on sentences. When translating from Arabic into English, lots of run-on sentences I see. And this correlates well, in fact, with the findings elsewhere, some research that I don't know about. But I assume that the building skills for the TOEFL test is based on research. And that this research told them that the main mistakes of people making English grammar relate to the verb tense and form and use, and also the verb subject-verb agreement, and the subject and verb both present, neither repeated. Now, in my experience, yes, I found lots of, I don't want to say lots, I found many instances where students would have double subjects, double verbs in English, or would have problems in using the verb. Now, from English into Arabic translation, this is another issue. Problems happen differently, and I will explain that. When they translate from English into Arabic, my understanding, my perception, my experience with the students giving me translation from English into Arabic shows me that the writing they give me, it is something that I cannot understand. Cannot really understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't give me any meaning. It gives me also the impression that this person is using something like a machine himself. And believe me, the machine could be sometimes much better than the work of them. But anyway, this is a human work that we have to accept and respect, of course. And this is human experience that we have to understand and help. This is why we are here as teachers. It is to look for those mistakes and try to help them. Now, this is again from my experience. When I used to ask students about the text, whether they understand it or not, I find little evidence that they understand the text in English. So there is a problem in reading comprehension. I think so. I think there is a problem in reading comprehension for students of translation studies. This needs some research to be made in my country, in Jordan, on the Arab world. I hope that somebody will make it there. And how the problems in reading comprehension in English affects their performance in translation, even if you give them the words, even if you get them everything. As a proof of this, in my teaching experience, I used to see students at the university wasting all the time in the exam looking for words from the dictionary. And I thought to myself, this is a distractor. This distracts them from translating the whole paragraph or understanding. This is obstructing their reading comprehension. This is what I thought. So I thought to myself that I could bring them the entire words from the dictionary and put them there, which I did. So I used to give them the passage for translation, and I copy and paste exactly what is there in the dictionary about these words. I try to imagine the words that are problematic for them, and write them down in English and Arabic so they don't waste the time in opening the dictionary. And by the way, I wouldn't at that time interfere in their choices for the words that they find in the dictionary. For that reason, it is not the fact that I just took one word from the dictionary and say, use this word and that's all. No. As I said, I would copy the whole entry of the dictionary, the whole entry, and put it there. The result, I remember it was not satisfactory, although I do not really remember whether it was because of reading comprehension or not. And I do not remember if to what degree this solved the problem or did not solve the problem, which means that the whole experience maybe wasn't really useful anyway. And if I have an impression after those years, I think it would have been, it was the same effect, like giving them dictionary to work on. Anyway, we do not have any kind of indication that reading comprehension affects the performance of translators, these translation students. My suggestion is that to give students reading comprehension course and to take the results from there and see which student performs better than the other ones, and to try to give them a test in translation to see which student does better, and to see the performance, and to see whether there would be any significant changes or significant results findings here. This needs lots of research, as you see. Now, once again, we're talking about those misconceptions about translation, and the first misconception is students say that university does not teach us anything. And in my analysis, I'm trying as much as possible to explain why this is more complex, in fact, than just saying it teaches us something or it doesn't teach us something. There is an issue about the improvisation of teachers. There is a question of really what does a teacher do at the translation department? Does he have the time to improvise his own training material? Or in translation, does he simply just get any passage in the word and give it to the student and ask them to translate? On what basis does he give them their feedback? Is it systematic or not? To the best of my knowledge, as far as I remember, when I was a teacher at the university, I wasn't required to do any of these things. I wasn't required at all as a teacher at the university to prove that I have a kind of feedback that I can give to students or can have a kind of assessment model or whatsoever. So basically, from my experience, there is some kind of shortage in terms of training the teachers themselves on those issues. And if there is any recommendation, I would recommend, first of all, to make research on how teachers devise their own material. Afterwards, just to make some suggestions based on these findings, to see if there are issues that have to be made or to be trained. So it is not easy to answer the question whether teachers do teach things at the university or not. We need to just to see if the students themselves know exactly what they have to learn, and we need to know the teachers if they are using any kind of research-based findings in terms of their interventions in the classroom. There's yet another thing that I have to talk about before moving to the next misconception. The word teach. What do students expect the teachers to teach? In my understanding, and correct me if I am wrong, in my understanding, if I say that somebody is teaching translation, then he is teaching translation. He is not required to teach students grammar. He is not required to teach them how to use the dictionary. He is not required to teach them how to differentiate between the finite and non-finite clause. He is not required to teach them all of those things that are outside the translation sphere. And that is the question. Once again, do students have competence in English grammar, for example, before they go to the translation course? Do they have good comprehension, level of understanding or good comprehension of the reading passages in English so that they can translate from English into Arabic? Do they know how to write in Arabic without mistakes, without grammar mistakes, without lexical mistakes, without problems? And once again, what will happen to the teacher when these problems appear at the classroom? Imagine, and this is a problem that I am raising, imagine that in the classroom, everybody, for example, raises these issues and problems, and all of them are making mistakes in grammar, all of them. Let's imagine this scenario. What will happen to the teacher in this case? Should he stop now teaching them translation and move to teach them grammar? These questions, if we can answer these questions, we will be able to answer the student's question. Does the teacher at the university teach him anything or not? And we will be able to see at least some kind of understanding of whether really there is prejudice when saying that the university hasn't taught us anything. And in the training material, we would like to ask about something. Does a university teach students technology, how to use technology, or should the students understand technology related to translation? This is another thing that we have to understand. And finally, I want just to answer this, to see if we can answer this question, the misconception of students that the university does not teach us anything, by asking the universities, do you give training of trainers, sessions to the teachers just on translation? Do you tell them about the strategies of teaching translation? Do you tell them about the content and how they devise the content? Do you tell them about the teaching skills, strategies, how to make the goal, objectives, etc.? Well, I'm waiting also for students. I hope that students would answer this question. You students currently studying at the university level, do your teachers, to the best of your knowledge, receive such trainings or not? And what kind of other facilities you have in order to get this kind of knowledge, like technological issues related to translation, for example? Do you get them at the university, or are there any facilities at the university, laboratories, for example, or whatsoever? These questions, I think, would also raise the suggestion that you can have a stakeholder meeting between students, teachers, but also translators from the marketplace to see what kind of cooperation that they can have together in order to solve these problems. So, does the university really teach nothing? This is just a kind of prejudice, I think. It's not going to be logical to make this kind of conclusion, and we don't know anyway. We need to listen to the students more to understand why they say these things anyway. Now, there is another misconception. The second misconception is that it says that only people who have formal education in translation can work as translators in the marketplace. According to the best of my knowledge, and to lots of research that I have on quote interpreting in particular, translators can work as translators and can work as interpreters even if they don't have formal degrees. To the best of my knowledge, the only requirement in the marketplace, not only in Jordan but also elsewhere in the world, is to have language competence and ability to use idiomatic English, idiomatic Arabic as well, to reduce the pressure that is otherwise on the proofreader to proofread, and to be able to acquire the skills and technical parts inside of the marketplace, including, for example, how to talk to clients, how to receive the instructions of the client. How do I know this information? It's now from experience. From my experience, I've been through several incidences where only competence that counts, not formal education. And I've been in certain situations where translators, I recruited them, I recruited interpreters in bulk, and never asked about the qualification that they had. Never. It was only a test that they have to sit, and that's all. And the client is the one who would decide. So it's not a matter of having formal education as a certificate is the one that's going to give you an entitlement for a job in the marketplace as a freelance. This, however, does not prejudice also the fact, it is a fact, that in some countries in the Arab world, usually people who have formally educated in something get more chances for employment. Sometimes they are the only people to get official employment based on their formal education. So yes, aside from this, if you want to work as a freelance translator or interpreter, there is no law in the Arab world which says that he has to get qualification to work as a freelance, unless he wants to go to the court, unless he wants to translate official documents. This is another story altogether. It's another story altogether. Now, with this, I think I finished the first episode. In fact, it has been so long that I'm talking about misconceptions. I'm sorry I have just to stop this video at the moment. So I will move to next misconceptions. The next misconception is the marketplace, this is a misconception that students think, that the marketplace is the best place to teach them translation. This is a misconception, or this is something that I regard as misconception for several reasons that I'm going to explain. The misconception number 4 is that students would say, they can still work as and expect to work as translators after graduation from the university. Even if they make mistakes, they can still work. I will also explain this misconception. Number three, if I get a training or mentorship at the marketplace office or agency or translation company, then it is the responsibility of those people to correct me if I make any grammar mistakes. Misconception number 6 is that translation is much easier than simultaneous or consecutive interpreting, and that consecutive interpreting is much easier than simultaneous interpreting. I'm going to explain this as well as a misconception. And last but not least is that translation companies should give training to students free of charge. So these are in totality, the 7 misconceptions that I'm talking about in these episodes. We finished with this one, number 1, and I hope that was useful. If you have any questions about what I said, please place them down. I really wish that we can all together work on research in order to look further into the details of those issues that I am raising, and hopefully it's going to be useful. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day. I'm going to meet you later on in another episode. Thank you very much, and bye for now. Thank you.